Hey everyone, my name is Yarrow and you're listening to the Daydream Rose podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm kind of fresh out of a really beautiful conversation that I'm sharing right away, which to be honest I don't usually do. And I also want to say sorry. I have a really big backlog of beautiful interviews that I have already recorded, and I think my injury this year just kind of threw me off a little bit of my scheduling thing, but I promise they're all coming out over the next, say, 8 to 10 weeks. And today I want to share this one because my guest Jamie is offering a really cool workshop this Saturday about decolonizing food. And I thought some of you might want to know about that. And also, it's just nice actually to publish a conversation right away after the fact. So I hope you will enjoy that. I really love talking about food and the politics of food and healing. And yeah, it's just a really good chat. A content note: about 20 minutes into this recording, Jamie is describing some colonial violence. So if that's not something that you want to listen to today, please skip those 8 minutes, so about 20 minutes in to 28 minutes in. Yeah, really take good care of yourself with that. Just a few notes from me. The Embodied Business community is open for enrollment at the moment, which is really exciting. It's 15 spots. So it's either going to be open until they have filled or till this 27th of April. For those of you that don't know, this is a year-long program with group coaching, a course which I recently re-recorded. We have themed workshops every month and co-working spaces. So if you're building a small business or you're expanding your blog or you're wanting to lean more into your creativity in a way that's community supported, then that might be cool. And also in May, I'm running a live version of my WordPress web design course, which I've re-recorded. So again, if you want to support around that and you want to do it together with other people, I know that creating a WordPress site can be daunting, but it's also exciting and empowering if you can do it. Then check that out in the show notes. And now I'm going to let you listen. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Gosh, I feel so lucky, as you know, to just have such beautiful guests who share so many stories of healing and discovery and intention. And today isn't any different. I'm speaking to Jamee Pineda, who has so much to share around different bodywork modalities, how we relate to our ancestries, what the role of food in our everyday lives. And so I'm excited for this conversation. And I want to tell you also how I know Jamie. So he's a part of the Embodied Business community, which is currently opened for enrollment, but probably won't be when this comes out. So forgot what I just said. Sorry. But Jamie, thank you so much for making time. It's really good to have you and to talk a little bit more about your work.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm so excited.
I'm excited too. So, for those that don't know you, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and what you're excited about at the moment?
Yeah. So my name's Jamie Pineda, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm currently located on Piscataway territory, otherwise known as Baltimore, Maryland. That's on the east coast of the U.S. for folks who aren't familiar with U.S. geography. And I practice multiple types of healing arts, mainly Chinese medicine, which includes acupuncture, Chinese herbs, qigong, moxibustion, and tuina, which is a type of body work. And I also practice hilot binabaylan. So hilot is it's a traditional medicine from the Philippines, and it involves many different kinds of healing modalities, such as body work, and it also involves herbs. Um, involves divination. Like there's more of a spiritual aspect to it than what my Chinese medicine training has been. Um, and I really like that is a fairly new part of my practice. So that I started training for at the beginning of 2020. Um, and right now, because it's pandemic time, I haven't been doing treatments in person. So my work has been completely virtual, which has been very interesting. But there's still so much of the medicine that's available that way, which is really great.
Yeah, what a time to make a big shift in the work that you do. And I've really loved witnessing how you moved things a lot online and how, yeah, how adaptable and creative you've been with that. So that also kind of really elegantly leads me to my next question, which is heavy in a way. So you can take this anywhere you like, but I would love to hear what your experience of the pandemic has been like so far and how it's changed your work. I mean, you already touched on that, but maybe there's more to say on that.
So on just like a very literal level, like a very material level, it like I basically like when the pandemic hit, lost all of my jobs. So I was working in a few different clinics in DC, and they closed down for quarantine. And at that time, we didn't know if any of them were going to open up or when that was going to happen. Especially because a lot of the clinics I was working in were community style, so it was multiple people being treated in the same room, indoors. So as you can imagine, that's a really hard thing to do safely while we're in a pandemic. So after those clinics shut down for a little bit, it just got me thinking, like, okay, like I really need to pivot my work. Like we don't know how long the pandemic's going to be happening. So why not take this as an opportunity to reshape everything that I'm doing with a lot of longevity and adaptability in mind, which led me to all of the online stuff that I've been doing, which includes one-on-one work and also includes a lot of classes, mostly qigong classes. So that's how it looks right now. Um, I'm also going to be releasing a podcast later on in May or June as a way to get folks more information about this medicine. The information that I've been sharing through social media, it's like social media has been a really great way to do that, but I just feel like I can't get into that material as in depth in that particular format. Like it's a great way to spark people's interest, but when we're talking about traditional medicine, a lot of times it really requires a big paradigm shift, and it's hard to give that justice with little posts on Instagram or Facebook.
Yeah, absolutely. That resonates for me so much. And yeah, as you know, I left social media as well because I really want to have more headspace to listen. I really used to love taking a podcast on a long walk, and I'm not walking at the moment, but I'm just sitting in my garden listening to, gosh, maybe 20 podcast episodes a week. And it's really my main medium, and I'm so happy to hear that you're gonna publish one. I'm super excited to listen to that and share it with other people. And I think it's just such a beautiful medium that gives conversations so much more depth. So, yeah, that's amazing. And also, I feel the grief of not being able to have community clinics in the same way at the moment. I used to go to one in Brighton, and there was something so interesting and magical about sitting in a circle with needles in your body together with other people. So, yeah. But the
Yeah.
right?
I miss it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, what are you wishing for in this transition as you're kind of thinking about what's next for you?
Well, what has been, I guess, like a hidden blessing in the pandemic is seeing how much everyone, because they can't go out as much, they're going inward. So I'm seeing a lot more conversation about wellness. I'm seeing a lot more conversation about people connecting to ancestral medicine. Uh, my own community and myself and like greater community, I think, are realizing, oh, like our ancestors have survived a lot of shit. Like we all come from lines of people that have survived horrendous things. And so there's wisdom in that, and there's stories in that, and there's learning to be had. And we're also like realizing where our current health systems or ways of relating to medicine and wellness are not complete, or they're not serving us as fully as they could be. So, um, so I think that's really it's this is a really hard time, but I also see a lot of opportunities for transformation because we don't have a choice. We have to do it.
Yeah, I was nodding along a lot with that. That's so true. How did you first get into the healing arts? I know such a beautiful thing to be able to do, and I wonder how, yeah, what made you choose that path?
So I came to the healing arts. I think like a lot of people come to healing arts, which is as a patient. So um, before I was doing healing work, I was working in nonprofits. I had my dream job at the time in my early 20s. I was working with a queer youth nonprofit group, and it was something that like really spoke to my heart. But at the same time, the way that the job was set up was really draining for me. So I was really underpaid, overworked, super stressed out, and so naturally, I burned out. I got really ill. I was like really struggling with my mental health and my physical health. So, and I didn't have health insurance at the time or a lot of money. So the only thing that was accessible to me was a community acupuncture clinic in Olympia, Washington, and what I could do with my diet. So luckily, I lived in an area where it was fairly easy to get organic food or to grow your own food. Like I at the time was like volunteering at the co-op so that I could get discounts on the food and the fresh produce there. I lived in a house that had access to a little bit of land, so I was able to grow some food there as well. I also like would trade with folks too. So I just, made a commitment to myself to access whatever medicine that I had available to me and to get better. And that really pivoted my relationship to the work that I wanted to do. So, starting out as an organizer and just realizing that that particular type of activism was not healthy for me and during that time and in the way that I'm engaging in it. Um, Not to say that just because it's organizing or activism that it's unhealthy. Um, just the way that I was involved in it was toxic to me. So having to pivot around that and to do a lot of soul searching um, to see what really sparked my interest and where I felt I could be of service to my communities in a way that wasn't draining and was actually fulfilling to me. So that's what brought me to going to acupuncture school. And originally, I actually wanted to learn Filipino traditional medicine first, just because that's my main heritage. My family's Tagalog, and we also have some Chinese Filipino ancestry as well. But living in diaspora in the US and also not being super fluent in Tagalog made it really, really hard to find teachers or to find programs that I could get to without traveling to the Philippines, which at the time I could not afford. Um, so acupuncture and Chinese medicine was sort of like the closest thing that I could get to that I felt like would still be appropriate for me to participate in. So that's how I chose Chinese medicine, and I also saw a lot of potential there for being able to treat larger groups of people to make it more financially accessible, especially since my first introduction to acupuncture was in a community clinic.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And yeah, gosh, I love everything that you shared there about this commitment you made to yourself and how you found all these different ways of moving towards healing. And I think, yeah, food is such a big part of that. And also, it's so fraught and so difficult coming out of diet culture and trying to make those shifts. I think for me, it's always required real courage and like a real commitment to stay with myself rather than what's out there and what messages I've been hearing. So I'm excited that you're talking about food and that you're finding ways of sharing that in a really in a really empowering and community-based way. Before interviewing you, I just checked out your blog and was interested about what you were writing about at the moment. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about stinky food?
I love talking about sticky food. So food, like as you mentioned, it's a huge topic. It's very complex. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of stories, a lot of history and culture attached to food, right? So food being one of my first medicines, like one of the first ways that I understood like receiving nutrition and healing, it's for me more than a physical healing. So as I mentioned before, like my family's Tagalog, and when I was living in Olympia, Washington, it was like the demographics there were very very white. Like it was the first place I'd lived. I grew up in Southern California, which is like very culturally, racially diverse. And when I moved to Washington State, it was a lot less so. So most of my peers, the school that I went to for college was very white, and so it was a big disconnection for me to be living in that culture, away from my family, away from things that I was familiar to. So food was a way to reconnect with that part of myself too. So that was, yeah, like that was like the most natural way for me to do it, because in Filipino culture, like food it's a huge deal. Like if you've ever been to a Filipino house or like a Filipino party, like people are almost at a harassment level, following guests around trying to feed them. And it's beautiful and sometimes annoying, but I love it. It's like also just very much a part of how I walk in the world. So I use food in a much deeper way than just physical nutrition. I use it to connect to my ancestors. I use it, frankly, I just use it. I use it for magic all the time. So it's a very spiritual thing for me. It's an opportunity to have medicine every time you eat, and that's to me a really that's a really important. It's a really important thing to have medicine that is like in our lives in such an integrated way. It's not just you take a pill, um, and it just like whatever you're dealing with goes away. It's like you're very involved in it, like the process of cooking, the process of like growing your own food, the process of sharing food with other people, are all, in my opinion, opportunities for it to be therapeutic.
Yes, absolutely. And I just love the care that goes into that, and also the relationships sometimes that we have or can nurture to plants when we're growing our own food. I think there's so much to learn from that. I've been growing little seedlings on my windowsill this spring, and I planted some of them out too soon. So I think they're not gonna make it, and it's heartbreaking, and it's so nice to have that
Oh
relationship.
no.
And to just, yeah, see how that evolves. And also, I think you're totally right. There's so much magic in food and ritual, and I think it's also a really beautiful access point to work with our inner child in a way when there's younger parts of ourselves that feel just disconnected or neglected. I think I just love making my favorite childhood foods for comfort for myself and just be like, yeah, these things are still available even if I haven't seen my family in over a year, and there's still a connection. So that's really cool.
Totally.
Yeah.
I neglected to mention the stinky part of that whole
Yes.
blog, which is probably like the most interesting, sexy part. so so the reason I titled it "Stinky Food" is because for me, reclaiming a relationship with food that was not shame based around culture. Like I'm not talking about disordered eating. I'm talking about shame from xenophobia. So as a kid, I was most definitely bullied for bringing lunches to school that were not like a sandwich and an apple and chocolate milk. Like sometimes I would get rice and stinky fish and stuff that um, as a little kid with other little kids was deemed weird or undesirable or like just an excuse to pick on someone who is a little bit different. So it's like eating stinky food to me. It's a way to reclaim that and to find something like beautiful and pleasurable and something I can be proud in. Um, and it's also a way to take up space in white culture. And by white culture, it's even greater than when I'm interacting with white folks. It's like white culture in the U.S. like permeates everything that we do. So it's anyone who's living in white culture can still act in ways that are upholding those standards. Um, so stinky food is like a way for me to really like have a dialogue with my own internalized racism. It's to have a dialogue with how do I decolonize my mind and my taste buds and my way that I experience pleasure, and the way that I relate to the ways that my ancestors have nourished themselves.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sorry that happened to you when you were a kid. And yeah, that also brings me beautifully next to my next question, which is what does it mean for you to decolonize your practices? And both what does that look like and what does that feel like for you right now?
So, specifically with practicing hilot, it's a big deal, I think, to have people practicing it openly, and to have those practices being brought into the diaspora. So, um, I want to give a little content warning because I'm going to talk about colonial violence. Um, so maybe Yara, when you edit it, you can like just tell folks like when in the podcast it happens.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yes.
So when the Spanish colonizers came to the Philippines, one of the things that they did was to murder the babaylan. So babaylan, they have different names in different groups in the Philippines. Sometimes it's Catalonan, sometimes it's Mombaki. So these were spiritual. These were leaders in the community that held spiritual knowledge, practiced healing work, did ceremonies for people. Uh, they were mostly women and folks that like might be considered non-binary today. So people who were not considering themselves or living in ways that were strictly male or female in that binary. So when the Spanish came, they recognized the leadership of these people, and that would they like like deemed them enemies of the Catholic Church, and so they were killed. And not only were they killed, the power of these babaylan scared the Spanish so much that they dismembered them after they killed them and fed them to the crocodiles because they were afraid that with their powers they would resurrect themselves and seek revenge. So um, with the murdering of the babaylan, who were like actively resistant to Spanish colonization, we lost a lot of our healing knowledge. We lost a lot of cultural knowledge. And the Spanish knew what they were doing, right? Like this is part of genocide. And a lot of that information had to go underground so that people were practicing in secret, or it had to syncretize with Catholic beliefs. So instead of, for example, worshiping indigenous deities or spiritual figures, that focus gets diverted to saint worship, or worship of the Virgin Mary. So to like, centuries later, be practicing this medicine, or at least parts of it, to me is a it's a really big deal. It's a real mark of the resilience of these practices and the resilience of my ancestors to keep some of these things alive. Um, I don't personally identify as a babaylan, and neither do my teachers, um, because we weren't brought up with those particular initiations in that particular cultural context. But we do consider ourselves binabaylan, which is like people who are like walking the path of the babaylan. So we are fulfilling some of those roles, learning some of that knowledge. So it's more of an adjacent path rather than claiming that particular role. Um, so to me, like just being able to practice this, practice it openly, bring some of that medicine to people in diaspora, like living outside of the Philippines, is it's huge. Um, and like like I'm still like I did my training and my initiation um, back in January of 2020 with uh, I actually flew out to the Philippines with a friend of mine who also went through the same school as I did, which is the Hilot Academy of Binabaylan. And we did that as a very big collective effort. So neither of us, like we fundraised for like a whole year because neither of us could afford it on our own. And it was just really beautiful to see how much people really wanted and desired and really wanted to honor this medicine. So we had a ton of donations that were able to cover our trip, that were able to provide for us lost wages for when we had to take off of work because we were there for almost a month. I was there for about 3 weeks. Um, so that's, yeah, like that whole process has been um, really like where a lot of my focus around decolonizing medicine is has come from in the last couple of years. And on top of that, like Chinese medicine in the US, I mean that's a whole other huge topic where how it looks in practice like is most of the people who practice in the US are white. Most of the folks who are able to access those that type of healing are also white. So I see that as very problematic that people within the Asian community are not able to access their own ancestral medicine a lot of times. So a lot of my how I've practiced over the years has been in relationship to that. Like, how can this actually be something for people within that community that it's from? How can they access that? How can they like go to school to be able to practice something that is theirs? And I see this medicine practice a lot without that reciprocity. So it is an open system. Like you don't have to be Chinese or Japanese to study this medicine, but like I still think that reciprocity is really important. Like there needs to be engagement with that community. Like I haven't like with the like ongoing violence against folks of color and like the ongoing violence specifically against like folks in the Asian community in the US. Like we're seeing elders murdered. There was a month ago, like those women murdered in um, Atlanta by a white shooter. Like it's like our our communities need a lot of healing right now. Like where are the acupuncture professionals who are not from that community? Like how are they? Why isn't there a collective effort to organize in solidarity? That I mean, I said a lot because I have a lot of feelings about it, and hopefully it was coherent enough for people to understand what I'm talking about.
Yes, absolutely. It was coherent and important to say, and I'm really grateful you said it. So thank you for giving us more context and sharing your story and the training you've done and your experience. And yeah, thank you so much. And I'm wondering if people are listening to this and they feel a longing for reconnection with their own ancestry as well. What is what do you recommend as a starting point, or what do you wish more people knew?
I really love that question. Um, I think that everyone should get in touch with their ancestors. And by ancestors, I mean more like, like you're sure get in touch with your ancestors if you can of your genetic lineage, but also like your ancestors are everyone who came before you that is like influencing you now. So your transcestors, like your queer elders, the land that you're living on, the plants that you are like in relationship with. Um, it doesn't have to be human ancestors necessarily. And to me, what that does, it provides an opportunity to understand what your inheritance is. And inheritance, you can inherit a lot of different things. Like you can inherit privilege. You can also inherit like generational trauma. You can inherit knowledge. You can inherit other relationships. So this gives you an idea of how to locate yourself in relationship to other people, to understand like, okay, like if you benefit from colonization, um, what does that look like? What happened there? Like, how can you connect to that process where you're actually providing reparations? Even for myself, like as a person who's like brown, living in diaspora, I still have to have accountability for the fact that my family are settlers on Turtle Island on the U.S. Like we are not indigenous to here. Um, like the pressures of colonization creating poverty in the Philippines, like did force my parents to migrate, to immigrate, or not just my parents, like my whole family had to immigrate from Philippines, but like that's at expense of the indigenous folks in the U.S. So understanding the complexity of different kinds of relationships, different kinds of relationships to colonization that exist even within my own lineage and within my own experience, I think is really important because it informs the way that I'm interacting with people. It informs the way that I shape my work. It informs the way that I think of accountability.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's a lot, right? It's a lot. I have so much respect for how much work this is and how deep it goes and how much it can bring up. And I wonder, in your own self and community care practices and in what you do day to day, is there anything that you feel you want to share that's nourishing to you?
Hmm. Well, the first thing is maybe obviously food. I think food is a great way to start. Uh, like even if you're not a good cook, like look at the food that you do eat. Where did those ingredients come from? That's one of my favorite exercises is to examine where they where they originated from. So if you're like drinking your pumpkin spice latte, where was cinnamon grown? Where did it originally come from? Where did the like coffee beans come from? Like we start seeing the relationship of how food travels to us. What are the stories there? Like, have you ever read about the sugar trade? Have you read about the spice trade? Like, how has that shaped us? So, starting with food um, is an important thing. Looking at the ingredients, trying to connect in through like cooking traditional foods, I think is also a really great thing. If food is not so much your thing, look at the art from your cultures. Listen to the music. Like, what is it saying to you? Like, I know that looking back into your ancestry and into your like one's family can be really loaded. Like some of our ancestors were not nice. Like some of our family is not family that would be safe to interact with. So you can go beyond that. Like you don't have to um, interact with things that you don't feel comfortable with because they're unsafe. But if it does feel uncomfortable, and you feel safe, I think it's important to think about that and think about why it's uncomfortable. Why is it hard? Like I used to, as a kid, never want to eat Filipino food. I didn't ever want to speak Tagalog, which is why I lost it. Um, and it wasn't until I was an adult that I understood that that was, well, first I was ashamed that I had been ashamed. And then later I realized that that was all a function of colonization, like conditioning my brain to not want these things because I was living in a context where accessing my cultural norms was not safe. So my relationship to it now is that that was actually a survival mechanism. And now that I'm in a much safer place and I have much more control over my environment, um, it's safer for me to reclaim that.
Yeah, that makes sense. You shared so much already. I wonder if there's anything else that maybe you feel like you didn't get to talk about yet that you also want to let people know about.
Um, Man, these topics are so huge, and like, where do I even start? Sometimes,
I know,
right?
but food is always a good place to start.
Food is always a good place. I love food. I like. I would encourage people who are engaging in decolonizing work to also, like, inform themselves and build relationships to like the indigeneity of where they're at. So, what does the organizing look like for the indigenous peoples of where you live? Like, can you how can you be supportive of that in whatever capacity is available to you? Um, like I did a land acknowledgement earlier of the fact that I'm on Piscataway territory, and land acknowledgements are great, and that's a beginning point. Like the acknowledgement needs to also uh, generate action and generate relationship building. So being connected to indigenous struggles all over the world, um, or wherever you're at, actually, like whatever's happening locally, I think is a great way to start. If it feels difficult to start that or to make contact in that way, you can also start with just tending to the nature of where you live. Like, even if you live in the city, there's still nature there. There's still earth underneath that concrete. There's still air. There's still water that's coming to you. Um, Tending to nature, tending to an earth that we are sharing, I think is another way to have a relationship with decolonization.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love the simplicity of that. I think sometimes you can just like pick some trash, you know?
Yeah,
That's a really good place to start, together with food and just being present with where we are and looking around ourselves and seeing what's already there. I think we as white people so often center ourselves and think we need to initiate some kind of action when that's true. Of course, sometimes that is appropriate, but so often there's already so much that we can just support in a much more integrated and um, fair way. Yeah, thank you. What are you currently offering and where can people find you?
so the next projects that I have coming up, well, one of them is like it's going to start probably before this podcast episode comes out. But I am doing a talk on the 17th called "Sarap: Decolonizing Medicine Through Food," and I love doing that talk. And it is what the title is. We're just going to be talking about food and ways to decolonize our diet, decolonize medicine through our diet, and that leads into a much larger program called Kitchen Magic. And that program is really like, how do we put that into action? And it's built around having a cohort of folks where we're learning how to engage in magic through our kitchens. And to me, magic is about transformation. It's about relationships, and it's about empowerment and getting connected to um, our spirituality by connection to our ancestors. And for my particular lineage, we practice atan, which is offering, and a lot of those offerings are food. So that is a way for us to connect. And that particular course is for set aside for a BIPOC cohort, so Black and Indigenous people of color. Um, Simply because like a lot of us um, have experienced our stinky food moments, have experienced alienation or bullying because of the way that we eat or the way that we live our culture. So beyond that, I am offering one-on-one sessions of virtual hilot, which is what I'm doing online is I'm not just so much doing the body work because that doesn't really make sense for me to do online, but I'm doing more divination work for folks on one-on-one with hilot, and I'm also practicing Chinese medicine online as well. Right now, I'm only licensed in the DC and Maryland areas. So that for that particular modality, that I can only see for folks who are residents of those areas. Um, but those sessions are really tailored to whatever whatever the client wants to work on and what feels easy to them. So it might be we're doing herbs, herbal consultations. We might be doing qigong, which is a type of movement medicine. Um, we might be doing lifestyle medicine. So looking at like your habits around sleep or your habits around like when you eat or exercise or just how you go about your day. There's like Chinese medicine is so good at preventative medicine and integrating all of that into our daily lifestyle. Um, and then I also will sometimes prescribe like self massage or acupressure for folks. So kind of depends on what people want to work on for that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. We'll link to that in the show notes. And yes, oh my God, I just want to just highlight again what you said. I think there's so much preventative beauty in Chinese medicine. I had a little bit of support around healing my broken leg, and I was just blown away with how beautiful it was to really be listened to and to have this like full body, full being intake where we really looked at all these different aspects of my life, and especially in the sharp comparison of this experience I had in hospital, which was what I needed at the time. I needed surgery, I guess. Um, and it was so beautiful to be able to have that additional support as well. So I really wish that for everyone. I wish um, that was just a part that everyone could access. And I'm excited that you're offering that, and you have found such beautiful ways of making that more accessible. So yeah, I'm excited for people to check that out. Jamie, thank you so much for everything you shared today. I'm really excited to bring this out, and um, yeah, thank you. I'm really grateful.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you mentioned your experience after you broke your leg because that's the paradigm shift that I'm talking about where we ask questions about the whole person, and it's not like you're not just the injury, right? Like they
Yeah.
probably asked you about your sleep, like what how you poop, like all these things that seem unrelated to a particular condition, but really it's like it's all connected.
Yes, I can confirm my poop was discussed in depth and it was really important. Yeah, I'm so
Poop
glad.
has a lot of information.
It does. Yeah. Especially if you're coming off of pain medication. It's so
Oh
intense.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Jamie. This was amazing.
Yeah.